So this presentation is titled Wealth Redistribution Technology. The next 5 years will likely be the most transformative and consequential in human history. AI capabilities are accelerating every quarter. The time horizon of the tasks that they're completing is now going exponential. Researchers at both Anthropic and OpenAI estimate recursive self-improvement to arrive sometime in the middle of 2028. I personally believe that over 80% of all white-collar labor is likely to get automated in the coming years, and robotic automation of blue-collar labor will promptly follow.
I think a good number of people on the committee are concerned about is just the very, very low level of job creation. If you adjust what has been the trend job creation over the past, let's say, 6 months, if you adjust that for what we think, our staff thinks, is the overstatement due to overcounting, effectively there's zero net job creation in the private sector.
So I believe that hundreds of millions of jobs are at risk. And whether this is going to happen in 2028 or 2033, the fact of the matter is that this transformation is coming. In the UK, for example, the unemployment rate is already almost higher than it was during peak COVID. In the United States, the job openings are already below their 2019 levels. Unemployment rate right now is at around 4%. Kalshi is estimating it to be at 9% in 2030, and I believe that that forecast will increase even further in the coming quarters. We can't talk about SPX6900 without talking about wealth inequality. The wealthiest 10% of Americans own 93% of stocks. The top 1% own more than 50%, and the bottom 50% own less than 1%. There's also the massive intergenerational wealth inequality as well. The older generations enjoy compounding effects on their wealth and on their assets, while the younger generations find it harder and harder to even begin building wealth in the first place. And the more capable AI becomes, the more rapidly wealth inequality will compound. The poor will get poorer, and the rich will get richer at the fastest rate ever before seen in human history. A lot of people talk about the K-shaped economy in these theoretic terms, but it's already happening and has been happening for the past 5 to 10 years. The S&P 500 continues climbing higher, while the Main Street University of Michigan Consumer Confidence Index is now lower than it was in 2008. Same with job openings. They continue climbing lower, while the stock market continues climbing higher. And at the consumer spending level, you're seeing the exact same thing. The top 20%, in fact, the top 10% of consumers are now the majority of the entire consumer spending, while the consumer spending by the bottom 80% continues declining every year. And this isn't just about wealth. The share of the income going to the top percent has been climbing higher and higher as well. If any of you have been in Bitcoin circles, you know that something happened in 1973, which has changed everything. That was the year where gold standard was removed. That was also the decade where offshoring accelerated, where mass migration to North America and Europe have begun. And these trends that we're discussing, this K-shaped economy, I think they will not only continue, but they will actually intensify and accelerate faster than ever before in the next 5-6 years. And since the relative power of capital to labor is the highest that it has ever been already, employees right now are being squeezed to the maximum. And I think that income inequality, wealth inequality, health inequality, longevity inequality, political inequality, reproductive inequality, unemployment, all of these things are about to skyrocket. AI will significantly reduce, if not outright kill, social mobility. It's going to take away human leverage, and it will forever freeze whatever place you are in the world right now, or whatever place in the world you'll be at the moment of AGI's creation. Or so the thinking goes. And I don't think this is hyperbole. If anything, this is understating the issue. I think this is a logical outcome from extrapolating all of the current existing trends. Unions this time around will not work, will not fix anything. If you study history, between 1915 and 1955, the power of unions resulted in wages actually tracking productivity growth. Ours stopped expanding endlessly, and companies actually had to negotiate. The middle class grew. The same amount of work today in 2026 actually went further back then. The system was forced to share the gains. This is one of the major reasons why the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, to some extent, are remembered so fondly in the collective zeitgeist. That was before fiat money. That was before massive waves of offshoring. And AI accelerates all of these pressures, higher output, tighter expectations, and lower costs. And the critical difference is that AI doesn't just speed up work. It reduces the total number of workers needed in the first place. Unions only work when the labor is hard to replace, local, physical, and essential to production. And AI attacks all of these at once. There's a saying, everything is wage suppression. Slavery was a way to expand labor supply and lower costs. Feminism, in many ways, a way to expand labor supply and lower costs. Offshoring and outsourcing was a way to expand labor supply and lower costs. Fiat money and inflation, they raise prices faster than wages, and they lower costs for companies in real terms. Immigration and H-1Bs expand labor supply and lower costs. And the recent shift from full-time work to contract-based deployment, once again, expand labor supply and lower costs. And you're going to see a significantly more dramatic version of all of this, because soon you'll have trillions of AI agents, which once again expand labor supply and lower costs. That's like having trillions of immigrants arrive to your country all at the same time, except this time around, the Earth is just one giant country. And you'll also have billions of robots, which also expand labor supply and lower costs. So it's a continuation of the same story that we've seen since the 1960s, but now it's going to be accelerated at unprecedented rates. And some people say that every technological revolution creates new jobs. I am personally skeptical of this stance. AI is not like previous technologies. The Industrial Revolution replaced muscle with machines, but AI revolution replaces the mind with machines. And you have to reason from first principles rather than analogy. Electricity and the internet did not possess its own intelligence or autonomous ability to complete tasks. This time around, we're not looking at augmentation, but rather total substitution. Tractors and electricity augmented muscle. AI replaces the mind. And I think that in most cases, tech executives and CEOs confidently proclaiming that AI will create more jobs than ever before, I think it's a form of gaslighting. So these are kind of the primary futures, kind of the umbrella scenarios that I see happening ahead. First is human extinction at the hands of ASI. Second is AGI being under control of one corporation, closed source, KYC'd, expensive. Human population intentionally reduced, not by AGI, but by humans controlling AGI for efficiency purposes. Third is AGI under control of 2 to 5 corporations, competitive dynamics shift from monopolistic to oligopolistic. Humans are collateral damage in the competition between militarized mega corporations. And finally, kind of like the desirable or the utopian future is ASI being a commodity that is widely available to all, just like the internet increasingly is today. Humanity successfully executes a shift from megacorp capitalism to fully automated luxury communism. And the third, in my opinion, is the most likely outcome. And right now on the screen, you can see kind of like my personal subjective probabilities of which one of the scenarios. And the other way to think about it is, you can kind of think of it on a spectrum like this, right? ASI gets created and just kills everybody. Then you have kind of ASI gets created and is used by humans to quickly kill off 50 to 80% of the population. Then you have a scenario where ASI gets created and 20 to 40% of the population slowly get killed off. Then ASI gets created, UBI is not given out, most humans are surveilled and simply walled off. Then you have a situation where extremely minimal UBI is provided, once again with mass surveillance. Then you have a situation where kind of a lot of people think that's what's going to happen. You're kind of like roughly given $1,000 a month, once again, still with mass surveillance. Some people talk about universal high income, where, crudely speaking, you're being given, due to this extreme economic growth, you're being given $10,000 a month, once again with mass surveillance. And lastly, you have this utopian future again, where you have what's called a collective ownership model, where instead of being given a UBI, you actually get to own the means of production, and you live off of the dividends of the labor of robots and AI agents. Now, over the past couple of quarters, this discourse around the permanent underclass has become very common. A lot of people kind of jokingly or semi-jokingly say that you have 3 years left to escape the permanent underclass, you have 5 years left to escape the permanent underclass. And I actually think the truth has the potential to be even darker than this. And that if AGI is achieved, or when AGI is achieved, there may not be an underclass at all. I think the discourse around this is somewhat misguided, and doesn't even begin to scratch the surface in many ways, and potentially gets much darker when taken to its logical conclusion. A few years from now, your intelligence, smarts, or tech skills won't matter whatsoever, because you will get outcompeted by AI in 99.999% of domains. Most people today, they hope to amass enough wealth prior to the moment of displacement. And otherwise, they will forever become part of the permanent underclass with zero social mobility, at the mercy of government redistribution programs, or so the thinking goes. This view, in my opinion, however, misunderstands and underestimates the changing landscapes around politics, geopolitics, and power. It's obvious that whichever nation creates an autonomous army of AGI robots and drones first will hold a decisive advantage against armies that still depend on humans. In his famous novel 1984, George Orwell described a certain future of mass surveillance. And 40, 50 years ago, that used to be unrealistic because of the scale of surveillance that was required. However, today, that scale is becoming increasingly possible. And at current trends, the permanent underclass will include everyone who doesn't have direct control over the most powerful AI armies. AI will not only automate all of white-collar and blue-collar work, it will massively automate and amplify regime stability, quote-unquote domestic security, and war. Today, the fate of the planet is largely decided through large entities like states, political parties, corporations, and similar large institutions. These entities, as of right now, strongly depend on humans for their power. Without humans, states cannot defend themselves, corporations cannot staff themselves and don't have customers, and political parties cannot get voters. These institutions become powerful to the extent that they can gather the support of their people and appease their people. And the worst megastructures still depend on people and their approval to some extent. AI automation increasingly changes all of this calculus. Minimum wage in the US today is $7.25 an hour. Unitary robots and LLM instances already cost 40 cents per hour and are getting smarter, faster, and cheaper every quarter. There will soon be no incentive to keep humans in the supply chains anymore. For the first time in human history, corporations and institutions will be able to ignore humans entirely. As we get closer to AGI, there's a shift in incentives of the big AI labs and corporations, as well as national superpowers. For now, they must still somewhat contend with the whims of their customers, investors, employees, citizens, and voters. This is the only way for them to continue acquiring more resources today. The term technofeudalism, however, understates the issue at hand. Even the proverbial medieval lord needed peasants to exploit the land and fight wars. As this stops being the case, everything falls apart. Rule of law, social protections, these can all become a thing of the past. Even in the most feudalistic and hyper-capitalistic periods of the past, capitalists and states still needed workers, employees, and soldiers. This mutual dependency is why the proverbial underclasses weren't completely eradicated in previous eras of history. With AI, there's simply no need for an underclass at all. Consenting customers, soldiers, citizens will no longer be needed, and their value will not be zero. It will actually be negative compared to the cost-output calculus of AI robots. Under this scenario, people will lose all of their collective bargaining chips and will not be able to do anything. And kind of the forces that have kept democracy or quasi-democracy that we're in right now, they'll be fully automated away. The idealistic thinking today goes that AI corporations will be nice enough towards humans In practice, however, sustaining the needs of billions of people takes a lot of resources: land, energy, food, and more. Said resources can always be used for other things, such as the competing needs of various AI corporations. And if AGI gets invented and is controlled by a very small number of people, there will be no permanent underclass because humans simply become obsolete. This is preventable while AI cannot yet replace humans. But past that threshold, the mega structures in power will not have vested interests in humans anymore. On the contrary, they will all stand to benefit from fully replacing humans as fast as possible. And if current rates of growth are to be believed, we have somewhere between 700 and 900 days left. History is rife with examples of a disempowered, marginalized class, but even calling them a class is charitable at best. Slaves in ancient Egypt, slaves in ancient China, most of them died during the large construction projects such as the Great Wall. More recently, British Empire starving millions of Bengalis in 1943, tens of millions dead in the Soviet gulags. And the Nazis had a term for this: useless eaters. Surplus humans, redundant biomass. You can think of kind of the future of humanity in these terms. So what is the point of discussing all of this? Because at the current trajectory of where we're going, we're headed towards a techno-feudalist dystopia at best, or cold extinction at worst. And essentially what's happening is that these techno-capitalistic forces are allowing future AI that doesn't even exist yet to use the financial markets and current incentive structures to bootstrap itself into existence. And just a small side note, kind of some of my predictions about the medium-term future. I think corporations, AI labs, governments, and militaries will gradually merge into one megastructure. I think corporations will become far more powerful than governments, even more so than they are today. I think governments will take larger stakes in the AI industrial complex to try to remain somewhat relevant. I think you will see a Chinification of the Western world. And what that means is I think both USA and China will kiss goodbye to all forms of democracy and capitalism, respectively, and fully restructure themselves as giant militarized AI labs within 3 to 4 years. I wouldn't be surprised to see open source models to either be heavily disincentivized or made outright illegal. I think GPU access and data center access will become even more tightly controlled. I think you will almost definitely see an intensification of the mass surveillance apparatus. And I think that you will see a push towards a CBDC in one form or another. And so currently the tech industry's PR machine is kind of feeding you, feeding the populace these promises of the following. Like UBI, you'll get $1,000 per month. Some people talk about UHI, you'll get $10,000 per month. And some people talking about a quote unquote a collective ownership model. You will get like these dividends from the means of production, right? Why? I think right now AI labs are still at a point in time where they need to support and cash flow from both their customers, their critics, upcoming IPOs, governments all over the world, right? But eventually that will not be the case. And I believe that future UBI is not a guarantee, far from it. And I think we cannot rely on the future generosity of a handful of technocratic billionaires who are competing not only amongst themselves, but also against China in a race towards building a machine god. Most of the current income taxes come from white-collar professionals in the Western world, who are actually most vulnerable to immediate AI automation. Future government revenues will have to come from corporate taxes in one form or another, but the relative power of corporations to governments will soon significantly shift even more in favor of corporations. And corporations naturally, they're strongly against having to pay UBI. And UBI also opens these kind of like these more sinister questions. Do we even need this many people at all? Why are we paying these people when they have nothing to do? Because we simply automated it all. And actually, under a fully automated system, the human body becomes a net negative. The techno-capitalism intentionally wants to make humans irrelevant as quickly as possible. And so this is why I believe UBI is far from guaranteed. At best, you're going to see it in very minimal sizes. I think game theory and incentives point towards extremely minimal or no UBI at all. And even if UBI does occur, UBI will be utilized in these like sinister ways. Want to eat this week? Give us your guns. Want to eat this week? Watch what you post online. Want to eat this week? Take the jab and don't ask any questions. Want to eat this week? You're too old. The nurse will assist your suicide. It's the humane thing to do. And AI and robotics will completely shift the calculus of politics and power. So all kind of these Enlightenment era humanist ideals will be thrown out the window. We have to accept that no one will save us but ourselves. And it's unclear if governments can even afford UBI in the first place, because the projections for the rate of debt growth are much faster than the projections for the rate of GDP growth. And even if they could afford UBI, it's politically dangerous to allow so many people to exit survival mode that most people are in right now and enter quote unquote leisure mode. Hundreds of millions of people entering leisure mode would have people demanding more rights, more equality, more representation, higher UBI payments, etc. And from the institution's perspective, there's a famous saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And so UBI is unattractive, both from the corporation's point of view financially, but also unattractive from the state's point of view politically. And in my opinion, the SPX 500 is becoming increasingly synonymous with AI. And this is only going to continue happening more and more. Right now, that is true to the extent of 35%. I wouldn't be surprised to see this at 70, 80%. And in my opinion, the stock market in the last 20, 30 years has transformed from a vehicle of opportunity to a vehicle of wealth extraction, right? We all know companies, or the best companies, are staying private for longer. And the very nature of the financial system is increasingly stacked against retail investors. What used to be a land of opportunity for retail investors in the 80s, 90s, even zeros, right now it's become a place where you go to use retail investors as exit liquidity, essentially. The median time to IPO has gone from 5 years to 14 years today. And if you look at the highest growth companies, almost exclusively they're entirely in the private markets. And by the time they do arrive to the public markets, the public markets are so more so used as liquidity or de-risking venues rather than sites of meaningful value creation for everybody. And you can see this in the data. And lately, sort of these companies that IPO, they IPO at these extremely high valuations that almost always in their first several months and quarters just proceed to drift lower towards lower valuations. For those of you that have seen my kind of Singapore presentations in late 2024, there has been this extremely similar phenomenon in the crypto markets between 2022 and 2024, where these sort of token projects would be deliberately launching at $5 to $10 billion valuations, and then simply drifting, almost inevitably drifting lower in 9 out of 10 cases. And essentially, the private markets or the private crypto VCs were essentially using the retail markets as exit liquidity. And I think increasingly, something like this is happening in the stock markets as well, but at a much bigger scale, right? At a global scale. And this is kind of like my prediction, or what I wouldn't be surprised to see happen in the next kind of 1 to 2 years. I think they will hype up the fact that kind of AGI is around the corner. The largest private companies, like 7 to 8 of the largest private companies in the world's history, are kind of set to IPO in late 2026, early 2027. I think they will use the entire system as exit liquidity. And once they've gotten as much cash and liquidity as possible, they'll proceed to crash the stock market directly or indirectly by saying that AGI is actually not close and more foundational research is needed. You can't simply scale kind of existing models. The stock market will crash, obviously coincidentally with the global recession. 1 to 2 years after this recession begins, they'll use the cash and the liquidity that they gathered in early 2027 to rebuy the depressed shares in the AI labs and AI-related companies at global recession lows. And ultimately, they'll end up with an even greater percentage of the net aggregate ownership of the relevant AI labs and AI-related companies than they had in 2026. And I think you'll see wealth inequality higher than at any point before in human history, right? Higher than 1700s, higher than 1800s, the 1920s. And if what you'll effectively have is you'll have less than 1,000 people pretty much owning everything there is to own, with the rest of humanity becoming literally, physically, and metaphorically irrelevant. And I think they will use the stock market, clever timing, and control of the media as a mechanism to transfer even more relative wealth and power from the poor to the rich. And I mean, this could happen in 2027 or 2029, but I think directionally speaking, you will see something like this occur, in my opinion. And so what are the problems, right? Like that we have summarized. What are the problems these are kind of like the top 10 problems, or some of the biggest problems that people in the world, especially like younger generations in the world, are facing in the next 5 to 10 years. AI extinction risk at the hands of AI. And even if that doesn't happen, you still have AI dystopia risk at the hands of the human AI overlords. Constant money printing, constant money supply expansion, constant inflation that's kind of like turbocharging all of this. Like Elon Musk said earlier, all of these forces are connected, right? And reinforcing each other. Extreme hyper-financialization. SPX 500, in my opinion, and kind of GDP growth at large, has become the sort of a proverbial god and an object of worship. There's net zero job creation, and the probability of wide-scale job replacements, in my opinion, and high unemployment is very, very high. Cost of living crisis, increasingly unaffordable housing, especially for those that don't already have their real estate, right? Wealth inequality, which has been increasing for the past 50 years, and in my opinion, is about to skyrocket. Fiat money, which is making it impossible to save, forcing regular people, from dentists to laborers, to if they have no choice but to quote unquote invest to survive, right? And I think late capitalism and the anxiety associated with it over the past couple of years, especially, it's forcing you not only to invest, but it's forcing millions of people to trade and even gamble in order to survive. And the stock market and IPO listings, they're becoming a system of extraction rather than opportunity. And if you actually connect the dots between all of these forces, all of these problems, you will realize that all of the above are being caused, being driven, being represented, being financed by, and benefit the equities market, the stock market. So what is the solution? What is our solution? It's to trigger a giant wealth redistribution phenomenon. SPX 6900. It's a decentralized, belief-based asset. A socio-economic movement whose goal is to eventually flip the stock market, to reach a higher market cap than the S&P 500. Its value emerges not from utility or revenues, but from collective narrative, community participation, and cultural coordination. So this is the market cap of SPX 500 today, at almost $67 trillion. And that little yellow dot that you see on the right, that is the market cap of SPX 6900. And the vision that we as a community have is to trigger what we call the prophecy of a stock market flippening, right? Is for SPX 6900 to reach a higher market cap than the SPX 500, right? And at first, this sounds crazy. But if you actually run the numbers, it's not quite as crazy as it sounds, right? 37 trillion, if you kind of use like an approximate midpoint, it sounds crazy, but in practice, it likely only requires several hundred billion of actual financial inflows to do it, right? And the higher the coins that are diamond-handed, the lower the percentage of coins that are actively circulating, and the thinner the order books on exchanges and pools, the less actual raw dollars it will take to flip the stock market, right? So in a way, the way to think about it is diamond handing SPX 6900 coins, especially outside of centralized exchanges in cold storage, effectively becomes an act of passive resistance. And once again, SPX 500 is becoming increasingly synonymous with AI. And in my opinion, I think what you will see is SPX 6900 will become increasingly synonymous with quote unquote human. And the way I see it is when SPX 6900 succeeds in flipping the stock market, it will directionally function as a one-time 50% wealth tax on the rich. And what wealth redistribution assets are, you can also think of them as vampire attack assets. And we're actually already seen several of them. Their goal isn't to generate revenue, but to simply act as coordination mechanisms and shelling points to simply redistribute and reabsorb value from existing assets. BTC is already doing it to fiat and by extension, bonds, treasury markets, and real estate. GameStop somewhat successfully did it to about half a dozen to a dozen hedge funds that were overshorting the stock. And the the SPX6900 movement is taking it to the whole nother level and is trying to absorb half of the entire equities market, right? It's trying to absorb half of the biggest stock index in the world. And if you actually think about it, these are re-emergent phenomena, right? You've seen Bitcoin do this to the tune of $2 trillion. You've seen GameStop do it to the tune of around $45 billion, but it was halted, unfortunately. And the S&P 6900, in my opinion, is kind of the next iteration of this, right? And as a young person, in many ways, you're almost like cornered into you're cornered into a space where we have no choice but to gather together as a community, create our own assets, and use a combination of memetics, social coordination, and decentralized technology for these assets to fully absorb or partially absorb a lot of the TradFi wealth, right? And, you know, Occupy Wall Street was the beginning of a lot of these ideas. But there was no asset underneath all of this, and there was no clear mission, right? I believe that having an asset that is kind of like a coordination mechanism, an incentive mechanism, is going to become an unavoidable part of future movements, right? Without a token and without a clear mission, you have no turbocharged incentives. GME was a slight improvement on this, and that's why it managed to be a moderate success. There was an asset. There was kind of a short-term mission to kind of defeat these like 6 to 12 hedge funds, but ultimately it was centralized, right? Between prime brokers, clearance houses, several equities exchanges, and dozens of other intermediates. All of these are essentially bottlenecks that could be shut off at any point in time, and that's exactly what we've seen happen. And with SPX 6900, you have an asset, you have a longer term, much more ambitious, bigger mission, and is decentralized. And I think it's a superior evolution, improving on these previous attempts. So I think non-financialized ideologies cannot compete against financialized ideologies, right? This is why the grand movements of the future greatly increase their probability of success by being tokenized. And I think SPX 6900 is kind of on the spear of this trend. More microeconomically, right? I believe that AI in the next kind of 2 to 2.5 years will make both discretionary and quant profitable trading much more difficult, right? You have less economies of scale. You have less technical ability in many cases. We have less compute. We have less capital. We have less speed. We have less inside information and less regulatory advantages. So we have to be smart, and we have to focus on things where humans still have an advantage for the next several years. AI is going to make trading harder, so only buy and hold becomes viable. And you will actually see even scammers and pump and dumpers will soon have no choice but to buy and hold. And you guys already know, right? Less than 3% of people make any kind of money on pump fund. Less than 3% of people make any kind of money on Forex and perps trading. Less than 3% of people make money on polling market. And this actually extends to a lot of other fields that people have been kind of making it, quote unquote, since 2015, right? Gambling, sports betting, poker, e-commerce, Forex, perps, prediction markets, software engineering, cybersecurity, design of various kinds, copywriting, white-collar jobs, social media, blogging, OnlyFans, whatever you can think of, right? Not only these are getting extremely competitive, rapidly saturated, but most of them are about to be hyper-automated by AI. So in order to succeed, humans need to be thinking about unique ways in which humans can win in this rapidly hyper-automated era. And so I think that community building will remain by far the most powerful thing we can do. We have to come together as a community and become a family if we are to survive. That's what the world needs right now, and is going to continue needing in the future. And instead of competing against other people in these like super PvP zero-sum games, why not do the opposite and unite? We can be so much more powerful and can find so many more synergies if we actually unite together rather than get atomized and fight one another. So what is the number one investment and valuation lesson that we've learned from crypto in the past 10 years? And you've already seen this in Eon Reborn's presentation, is the fact that community is by far the number one driver of value, right? And if we want to build the greatest crypto asset ever, we need to build the greatest community ever. That's the most important thing. That's like the quote unquote fundamental that actually drives our success. And I believe that SPX6900 has by far the most exciting mission of any asset in crypto. And the reason I'm obsessed with it and have been obsessed with it since early 2024 is this presence of a grand epic mission to flip the stock market, right? No other coin has this insanely ambitious target and insanely quote unquote delusional mission. And I think that SPX6900 is a decentralized, non-violent idea, a very elegant idea, which can result in these UBI-like and wealth tax-like outcomes, right? And we're essentially making it happen, just like Polymetric said earlier. We're making it happen without kind of like hoping and praying for the governments or politicians or corporations to do it in the future if they're kind enough, right? And this feels like magic to me. It's almost like a form of collective manifestation and a self-fulfilling prophecy. For those of you who know this, kind of like a hyperstition, almost like we want to trigger a hyperstition and availability cascade. And this kind of ideological premium or this passion premium that I'm sure that a lot of you guys in the room feel, it spiritually turbocharges the average holder 3 to 4 times harder compared to an average coin. And you can feel this extra energy, right? You can feel the electricity in the air. And I believe I'm not the only one like this. And future people who come in contact with SPX6900 will feel the same way. And as we're already seeing, and data proves this. Now, I know there are a lot of people in the community that don't want to obsess with metrics too much. And I totally agree with them. But a lot of people came to me in the DMs, in group chats, and they said, look, right now, I'm a full believer. I'm a complete believer in the flippening, but it was actually some of your metric stuff, some of your early data stuff that kind of got me, that piqued my interest in the first place. So I'm just going to share a couple. Many of you have seen this. This is the supply squeeze composite that Matt Beck invented. And essentially it measures how tightly the coin is being diamond handed. And right now we already, 2.5 years in, we already have a higher score than both BTC and ETH did at the exact same age. But also, we're essentially at the same level of diamond handedness that it took them 17 years to achieve. We're already there in 2.5 years. And I believe that this is actually saying something, right? The hippie right brain and the autistic left brain, they're actually showing the same thing, right? The spiritual energy, but the blockchain data simply proves this as well. And this is actually a metric that I invented just a couple of weeks ago. I call it the believer to trader ratio. And with these greatest assets in crypto asset history, whenever this believer to trader ratio spiked to a certain high level, it actually almost always preceded this great parabolic growth, right? We've seen this before Bitcoin's 2013 parabola. We've seen this right before its 2015 to 2017 parabola. And we've seen this most recently, just before the ETF approval, the believer to trader ratio reached its highest level ever, actually a level of 15. Remember this number. And I think it's recently kind of gave a bullish signal on Bitcoin as well, just a couple of weeks ago. We've seen the same thing in Ethereum, right? When it reached a level above 10, we've seen the 2017 parabola on Ethereum. When it reached, again, a level of 11 or 12, we saw the great 2020 parabola. Then again, we saw the 2021 parabola. And recently in 2023, it has spiked as well. And then we saw a 2024 parabola once again. We saw this with Solana. Some of the early spikes gave you the 2021 parabola prediction months before it happened. And then the highest level on believer to trader ratio that Solana has ever reached has resulted in this massive kind of 2023, 2024 boom that we've seen in Solana. Similarly in Link, powerful cult community in 2019, those early spikes, they preceded the great 2019, 2020 parabola by a year and a half. We've seen the same thing with Near. Those spikes kind of preceded the parabola in 2023, right? And I think this is the cleanest example because it's the most organic. There was no supply control on Doge, compared to some, maybe you can argue that happened with some of these other coins like Link, Near, whatever, right? Here, the entirety of Doge supply, it arrived gradually. So you can't really, this is like as pure as it gets. And here you can clearly see 3 spikes above 15. So you have 15 believers for each trader, right? So those 3 spikes to 15, it gave you that prediction of the 2017 parabola. And then again, when it hit 15, we saw that gigantic parabola to 90 billion, the famous Doge parabola to 95 billion that we saw in 2020, 2021. And there is no chart, of course, so I'm not putting price on here. But as of this morning, the SPX6900 has reached the highest believer to trader ratio it has ever seen. It's just over 15. And remember that classic 15 number that predicted all of these great parabolas on these previous most successful crypto coins in history, right? And we're starting to flirt with the 15 and the 16 level. And so far, this is the fastest progress of any of the organic coins that I've checked. And it's been up only since SPX's creation. And I think this is telling you something, like that same electric spiritual energy that a part of you feels but can't explain. The math and the data is essentially the mirror image of this. And effectively, with every passing week, we have more believers and fewer traders. And this is exactly what we need. We need to get this level as high as possible, and that's how we win. And the higher this level is, essentially, the higher the percentage of the supply that's being diamond-handed and not moving, the less money it will actually take for us, for our market cap to flip the stock market. And if AGI is 2 and 3 years away, and it takes 2 to 3 years to build a foundation for a major movement, it is quite plausible that SPX 6900 is very likely the ultimate opportunity available to the world right now. In my opinion, all the trends that we can discuss, all of the sort of afflictions that affect us right now, inflation, AI anxiety, inequality fears, lack of jobs, lack of financial opportunities, they're all pushing millions of people to trade. But trading and gambling itself is just another trap, which is about to get saturated by competition and hyper automation by AI. The only solution is to come together into a single epic community. And I'll just leave you with sort of just a few goals, priorities, and my personal subjective advice that I would give to the community, right? I think, and half of this is just me speaking to myself as well, but also to the community as a whole, right? We need to stop saying 100 billion, 200 billion. We need to aim to flip the entire stock market. Lean into the delusion. Lean into what sounds like delusion to the outside observer. I think this kind of level of delusion, it's inspiring, and it's a breath of fresh air in sort of this monotony of everyday existence of algorithmic late capitalism, right? I think we should completely move away from AI slop whenever we can. No shitty content, and as Hype says, make it memorable. This is very, very important. We can't be like all these other forms of media that are just machine generated right now. We need everything we do, we need to put our kind of heart, soul, and kind of human effort into it. Non-violence. This is why I love SPX 6900, right? It's elegant in the sense that it's a non-violent movement. And we're voting with our money. We're voting through coordination and financial markets rather than physical violence of any kind. And at the risk of sounding a little bit hypercritical, but we shouldn't obsess over metrics, right? Just like the 2023 OGs in the community always tell us, you need to focus on pure belief, not metrics. If you need metrics for your belief, then you don't fully believe, right? Stop relying exclusively on X or Twitter. I think many of us are on X because like you get these like short-term dopamine spikes from higher than usual likes from like the community because most of the community is there. But if you truly care about SPX 6900, you must expand beyond, right? YouTube, Reddit, and Facebook. And like I've been saying, we need to make videos. We live in a videocracy, and a higher and higher percentage of all media in the future is going to be videos, right? And we need to reduce the supply of SPX 6900 available on centralized exchanges. Right now, it's somewhere between 15 and 16%. We need to get it below 10. And the lower we get it over the coming months and quarters, the better. Take your coins off exchanges and hold them in cold storage. And we need to make this a permanent part of culture. The more this is true, the more likely we are to succeed in our mission. there will be nothing left except for community. That will be the main profession, the main career, the main activity, and the core valuable thing we have left. And SPX 6900 is front running this massive transition. There's virtually nothing other than SPX 6900 positioned to absorb trillions worth of value of community formation. And SPX 6900 is the greatest financial opportunity of our generation. Soon people will realize there was never supposed to be just Bitcoin or end just with Bitcoin. We literally must birth new assets into existence. SPX 6900 is many things, but in this regard, it is a perfectly timed ideological successor to Occupy Wall Street, to GME, and even to BTC. There will be headlines. I can promise you that. Flip the stock market. Thank you.